right, well, why don't we get started? Welcome. This is buying and selling homes during the coronavirus pandemic, which of course we are going through right now. Let me make sure that I'm doing this the right way. Let me go back with just one. This is what we're going to be talking about today, going through some provisions in the contract and looking at the market, finding out what the people in the industry are saying about what's going on. Talking about virtual, everything's going virtual, almost everything. Looking at how closing services are working, what's happening with lending, and then what's happening with title. Hello, I'm Ann Pollock. A lot of you know me, but some of you don't. I'm a practicing land use and real estate attorney. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I'm a partner with Fletcher Fisher Pollock, which is a boutique women-owned real estate and business law firm. And my partner Tina Fisher and I also opened Smart City Title Services in 2019. So we're trying to provide more opportunities to help people in the residential business. So I want to start talking about some key provisions that you should think about when you are entering into a contract. For the most part today, I'm going to talk about the FAR bar contracts. That's the contracts in Florida that were prepared by the Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar. They're pretty standard here, and a lot of realtors use them. So they are a good thing to point out, but recognizing that other contracts exist and are being used, and you should still keep an eye on the provisions that are similar or deal with the same issues. So force majeure, that's the big one. That's the one we're all talking about. Is coronavirus, COVID-19, is that a force majeure that would allow you to terminate? Ultimately, there's a lot of buyers that want to get out of these contracts because of the coronavirus. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what's going to happen, so they want to get out. Well, does force majeure provision allow that? As you can see here, the provision allows you to get out of performing an obligation that is delayed, caused, or prevented by an act of God or force majeure. That's the as-is contract. And the regular one says if it's disrupted, delayed, or caused by force majeure. Force majeure is a variety of listed items here: hurricanes, floods, fires, other acts of God. You're required to take reasonable, diligent effort, but what you're getting here is an extension of time. You're not necessarily getting a termination. So what it means for your contract? Well, it doesn't automatically terminate, okay? It provides an extension when one of those events prevent you from performing one of the obligations in the contract. You can only terminate if you go past 30 days past the closing date in a standard contract, or 30 days total for the as-is contract. It's interpreted very narrowly. So fear of the virus, fear of the downturn in the economy, these are not acts of God. The items listed in the force majeure provision are pretty specific. The courts have required that they be specific, that it can't be something broad where you can interpret it as any manner of item. And generally the FAR bar contracts don't include a reference to pandemic or government action unless you are actually adding that as part of an addendum or an amendment to your contract. Legal interpretations can vary as to whether or not the coronavirus is an act of God. Case law seems to suggest it probably is. But remember, you have to take reasonable, diligent effort. You have to exercise due diligence in figuring out a way to get around these hurdles that are thrown up to you. And one of the things that is very possible now is to do things virtually. So that's a good way to get around these performance problems that you might have. And lastly, the thing I wanted to point out is to think about whether or not the force majeure, the act of God, is unforeseen. It's not specifically listed in the contract that it must be foreseen, must be unforeseen, but courts have interpreted act of God to mean something that's unforeseen. So if you know the coronavirus is out there, is that something that you can get an extension for under this provision? Probably not, but there are some other options. Here's some other things to think about. The tenant and occupancy clause. Watch out if you've got a tenant in the property right now. The Florida governor just recently extended the suspension of evictions and foreclosures in Florida through July 1st. Other states have also created a suspension of evictions and foreclosures in order to help residents living there. But it means that if you're going to buy a house and there's a tenant in it, the tenant has a little more, it's a little rougher to get them out. So you want to be very clear about what's going on with any occupants in the house right now. Closing dates, lenders are asking for longer timeframes. Things are going slower because a lot of people are working from home. And even though they're moving forward in the process is taking longer. So they're recommending 45 to 60 days out instead of maybe 30 like you might have been doing. The appraisal period and the inspection period are also periods where you want to ask for extra time. Banks are holding off on appraisals until all the loan documents come in and the loan is basically approved. So that will really extend the time needed to get an appraisal. You can always get an addendum to make sure that you have the time you need. Inspectors are busier than ever. And now with the need for them to come, and then you might need to have repairs done, you want to make sure you have plenty of time to get that all done within the inspection period. So if a problem arises, you can get out of it. So some cancellation and termination provisions that you might want to look at if you're trying to get out of the contract. Of course, during the inspection, if the cost to repair warranted items exceeds the repair limit, which is the percentage that the seller agrees to pay to repair, the parties can cancel. With the as-is contract, the buyer has an opportunity to get out of the contract really for any reason where they find the property is not acceptable. And I want to just stress that these provisions that I'm talking about here, I've really summarized them. And it's very important to read your contract, read the details. Every contract, most contracts are all different. And so I am being, this is a little bit of a summary of provisions. So don't rely solely on what I'm saying here, but look detailed into your contract. Financing contingencies are another opportunity to get out of your contract. You still have to use diligence and good faith to obtain the loan commitment in both contracts. Don't think that because it's the pandemic that you don't have to make an effort to get your loan commitment anymore. Again, the coronavirus is not an automatic out. The fact that you're afraid of the economy or the virus, that's not an automatic out. You still have to comply with the provisions of your contract, and they require that you use due diligence and good effort to try to get your loan commitment. Appraisal contingencies, also, there are some opportunities to get out of the contract if the property is not appraising at the purchase price or with the as-is if it doesn't meet the terms of the loan approval. But again, recognize that there are notice requirements with the seller that you must follow those. And if you don't meet those notice requirements and that time frames, then you might lose the opportunity to get out of the contract. So in Florida, the Florida Association of Realtors has created this coronavirus extension addendum. And what it does is allow for the extension of timeframes within existing contracts. It extends all these different items. You can check them off, whatever you feel you need to extend. And at the end, there is a provision that basically says if the loan approval expires or the lender refuses to fund the loan due to COVID restrictions, the buyer can terminate. Now, certainly, as we talked about, fear of the virus, fear of the economy, they're not reasons to get out, but they may be reasons to extend. And if you get both parties' agreement, then you can extend some of these dates. Sellers, what I've heard from various people is that sellers may be hesitant to agree to this because it's so open-ended for the most part, especially if it's a new contract where COVID was foreseen. We talked about this. They may want to have required that the contract actually provide the dates that are based on the current circumstances. And if you entered into it after the pandemic had already started, then you probably should have addressed these time periods already. You can create perhaps a modified extension that provides for some flexibility, but still requires closing. Ultimately, sellers want to make sure we're closing, and they don't want to have coronavirus as an excuse to get out of the deal. One thing I want to advise is that if you're using something like this, that when you're extending certain deadlines, you're making sure to determine that the extension of one deadline does not impact the extension of another deadline. And if it does, you're addressing that. This generally has been used for existing contracts that were in occurrence from before the pandemic kind of started. But now as we move forward in time, it might be less needed because you can, of course, address this in your original contract. However, if in the fall, the virus comes back in a big wave and that is unexpected, people may want to use this going forward. So let's talk about the market. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people to kind of see where we are. And what it comes down to is the supply of homes is at near record lows nationwide. It's near record lows in Tampa Bay. Demand is still high. And the supply of homes was at near record lows before the pandemic. Fortunately, we come from a strong market here, and it seems to be staying relatively steady after having a big dip in the beginning of March. However, of course, if more coronavirus cases arise and a second shutdown happens, that could be a big blow to the economy. Sellers initially took their homes off the market, or they hesitated to put them on. They were concerned about showing their homes. They were concerned about what the economy might do and what the home value might do. But ultimately, we've learned that really this is at its core a public health crisis. It's not a housing crisis. And the low supply has kept prices from tanking. So this varies, of course, market by market, but certainly in most markets, the housing prices have not gone down consistent with how much of a decrease in home buying there was, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. The market is also durable. Studies show that most full-blown recessions do not decrease home prices. The one in 2008 was a housing crisis, and that decreased it, and that's all in the back of our minds. But most, over time, the studies show they don't decrease housing prices very much. And inventory is still low here. So demand went down, but it seems to be roaring back. Buyers are in their houses. They're seeing the good and the bad of their house. It's too small, it's too large. I need to get out of here. I want to be in a different area. So they're coming back. Unfortunately, there's not much supply. A Zillow survey showed that demand was down in March, but it's up in April and May. And again, the prices didn't decline as much as the steep decline in actual purchasing. So LendingTree just a few days ago came out with a survey, the results of a survey on what buyers are doing. And these are some incredible numbers, I think. 53% of home buyers are more likely to buy a home in the next year due to the pandemic. More likely because of record low mortgage rates, because the reduced spending during the pandemic where they can't travel and they can't go out has allowed them to save for a larger down payment. These numbers are different depending on if it's a first-time home buyer or a rebuyer, but for the most part, the majority of people are looking to buy a home. Now, 20% of buyers are less likely to buy a home because of the pandemic for all the reasons we've been talking about: economic uncertainty, the inability to tour houses in person because of the fear of the virus, and loss of income. But there is a lot of virtual touring of homes, and this has increased steadily over the past 3 months. 33% of buyers say they buy a home without a physical tour. And that's really an incredible discovery that there are a lot of people that are willing to buy based on a good virtual tour. They don't even need to come see the house. Now, granted, if you look at these numbers here, they depend enormously on who you are. Millennials are much more likely to do it than baby boomers. First-time homebuyers are much more likely to do it than repeat buyers. And men are much more likely to just buy a house without walking through it than women. So I don't know if that percentage of people who say they'd buy a home really is just a lot of men that are looking to purchase, but that's what the things are showing. So what are the real estate realtors, what are they saying? I talked with many of them, and for the most part, they're optimistic. They really think that the lack of supply will keep prices from sinking. They see a lot of influx of people still ready to come from out of state to Florida. They notice that those who are motivated to sell have a lot of options because there are buyers out there that want to buy their house. Higher end homeowners are not pulling the trigger now. Houses under 500,000 are going like hotcakes. And we're going to talk a little more about that in a few minutes. So how are in-person home showings going? They have slowed down significantly, but realtors are finding ways to make sure that buyers can see the houses. So when they have to have an in-person showing, they are ensuring that they follow certain parameters, keeping a safe distance, limiting the amount of people that come in, confirming that the buyers aren't sick or haven't been from a hot spot recently, requiring that the buyers wear masks, that they wear gloves and booties sometimes that the realtors often will provide, advising buyers not to touch anything. There are some creative ways that realtors really can make this work is making sure all doors and cabinet doors, closet doors are open, putting plastic baggies on all the door handles so that you can take them off when you're done and throw them away. One of the things to watch out though is I've heard there's reports of more litter. So as people are wearing masks and they're wearing gloves, they're tossing them outside and causing a litter problem. So please, if you're showing a house in person, you make sure that everything gets cleaned up because we do not want to have a trash issue as well. Make sure that buyers from out of town are dealt with a little differently, that maybe you encourage them more to have a virtual tour. There is from the Florida Association of Realtors, a in-person access acknowledgement. So this is a form that you can find on their website that basically acknowledges all the parties, the buyer, the seller, the realtors, the landlords, the tenants, that they acknowledge the risk and that they're assuming the risk of an in-person tour. You know, as an attorney, I will say that anybody can sue for any reason, so this doesn't mean a lawsuit's not going to happen. However, it at least helps with it, and it pushes people to acknowledge that what you're doing here may be slightly risky. Vacant homes clearly are easier to do than homes with people in them. You can do virtual homes easier, but you can also tour them in person more easily. Though I would recommend, and some of the realtors have told me that what they recommend is they always tell a person selling a house that you want to declutter so that the buyer feels more like this could be their house in the future. But this is even more important now because you want less things around that could be touched. Lastly, I just want to point out that the Florida Association of Realtors has put out some guidelines to help keep all parties safe. And if you go to that website there, you can get that information and use it. So what have we learned? Virtual is now. Everything's going virtual. Almost everything is going virtual. And this probably is the future. So there are lots and lots of options if the seller is willing to sell. There are lots of options to show a home. There's a lot of technology that's come out to support realtors. I've listed several companies on here that you can look up, and they are a variety of virtual tour companies, digital opportunities to connect with clients, and really a lot of creative ways to show the house. This has become a huge business for photographers, and certainly they are, again, requesting that they be alone when they go through the house, that there not be people around. Millennials, for the most part, like we talked about, they are willing to go through a virtual process, and they want to. They do everything virtually anyway, and there's less reason for them to go through the house than you might think for somebody from an older generation who wants to see every nook and cranny. But there are ways to do that. And one of them is to have the realtor actually go with the camera and film and talk about the house as she or he is going through it, to actually do a virtual tour where the buyer is on the other end of the line and can ask questions, and you can specifically point out certain features or certain issues. So you are right there, but it's virtual for everyone except the realtor. And I thought an interesting quote I found was that it'd take you an hour or two to see a house in person in the old normal. It's a very inefficient way to do it. And now you can see it virtually, and you can see a lot more houses more quickly. You can knock out houses from your list more quickly, and you can move forward in a much more efficient manner. So this is what we're learning. Be creative. I think this applies to any field that's dealing with the coronavirus. Whether you're a retail business, or you're a law firm, or you're a realtor, any business, you need to be creative. You need to be imaginative. You need to learn the new technology that's coming out and use it. And ultimately, you need to communicate, communicate, communicate. Make everyone aware of what's going on, make them aware of protocols, and just keep that communication open since everyone's in separate places. So let's talk about different closing services that are occurring and what people are seeing. So for appraisals, in-home appraisals are still being required for FHA loans. The appraisers generally are going to wear masks and gloves, booties, but many are moving to virtual or doing drive-bys and using computer algorithms and information that you can find online. What I found was that some of the appraisals are coming back much lower than would be expected, and with footnotes that say, oh, this may not be accurate because I didn't actually get to go inside. Well, so the way bankers are dealing with that is they're either going and having their own drive-bys to check out the house to see for themselves, or they're having the seller do a virtual video tour of their house so that the appraiser and the banker can see what's going on inside to get a more accurate piece of information. Inspections are going crazy right now, but what I've heard from inspectors I've talked to is that for some reason there is really a lack of good inspectors. The inspectors that come are wearing masks, gloves, booties, just like everyone else that's coming into the home. Initially, they were just serving vacant homes, but there were so many homes that had residents in it that they needed to move that back to doing that. So they go through the same process. They're just extra protected, and then they meet the buyer afterwards or by conference call and go over the issues. Some have suggested that you can do this virtually, where the inspector has a camera and shows the processes they're going through. But what I heard from inspectors locally is that that really doesn't work. They're holding a lot of tools, they're in tight crawl spaces and attics, and it's, it's very difficult for them to take photos and explain what they're doing and make sure they're not missing anything as they do an inspection of the house. Surveyors, they saw an initial tough 5 to 6 weeks, a lot of refis instead of new home purchases, but it's really picking back up. They don't need to go inside the house when they're doing a survey of the outside. And a lot of those companies were already set up to do work from home. So they have been pretty efficient in doing the drafting of the surveys afterwards. One bank I heard from said even surveys are coming back faster than they were before the pandemic. So that's great. Mortgage lending. So this is a big deal. As we talked about, buyers are looking to buy because mortgage rates are down. The Federal Reserve has had 2 emergency interest rate cuts already. There's less people in the market, so there's less competition for buyers that are remaining. There are, of course, lots of home equity loans, so buyers are considering that first. But one thing to watch out is mortgage credit requirements are increasing. So some banks are requiring higher credit scores and 20% down. But for jumbo loans, and this is one of the reasons that the homes above 500 are kind of struggling a little more. A lot of banks, most are requiring 35 to 40% down. So if you've got a $1 million home, you're now paying potentially $400,000 down. And it's been very difficult to find banks that won't require such a high down payment for jumbo loans. Some mortgage brokers are looking for employment verification and asset documentation right up to the day of closing. With the uncertainty in the economic market and the job market, they want to check very closely. Most banks, though, are maybe doing that 30 days in advance. Delinquencies are up, and the CARES Act moratorium on foreclosures is ongoing at this point. So risks for the future. It could be good. It could go back. If things continue the way they are, we hopefully get more supply. The buyers continue wanting to buy. We move forward back to pre-pandemic levels. But if the unemployment continues, if the unemployment insurance issues continue, if the disease comes back stronger in the fall, it could cause more problems for mortgage buyers and for mortgage brokers and for buyers. So you have to watch out. All right, yay, we've gotten through all those processes and now it's closing time. Like I said, realtors are seeing more sale pending signs than new listings. It's a seller's market. So how are people closing? Well, for the most part, we're still doing in-person closings. Title agencies are open. They're creatively figuring out ways to get the deal done. But what's important is, like we've talked about over the past half hour, it's important to create upfront expectations for the buyers and sellers that are coming to your office or coming by for the in-person closings. One suggestion was to explain that, just to explain the rules. Another was to sort of say, well, we are using the same rules as the local courts, which are also requiring, masks and social distancing and hand sanitizing, requiring them to come up with a different plan if they're sick, sanitizing all surfaces before and after, splitting up the buyers and sellers into different rooms or coming at different times, only allowing the people in that are actually signing the documents, giving everybody new pens. I mean, this is a great time for title agencies to use up their pens that have their name on it. Give everybody a new pen. And one of the things is that the lenders really are requiring wet signatures still. There aren't a lot of lenders that are allowing e-closings and remote notarization. This is partly because this is how it's always been, and banks are really very slow at moving forward on this. And also there's some other issues that we'll get into in a little bit. Curbside closings is another opportunity. Drive-by closings, or as it really should be called, drive-through closings at the car, where the settlement agent and the notary come up to the car and actually sign the documents. You want to make sure that, again, you have your upfront expectations on how everyone should be dressed and wearing their masks and their gloves. Again, free pens, for everybody. And then we make sure you have the right witnesses. We get documents all emailed to the parties, and everybody gets their home safely. Mail away closings is another way to do it. This is pretty common in commercial deals, and it's happening to some extent with residential deals where the buyer, the seller, gets the document signed through their own way, gets their things notarized, gets documents witnessed, and then mails it to the title agency. The important thing is that the wet signatures, the originals, are actually in the hands of the title agent by the closing day so that we can record. So virtual closings, that's the big new thing. In Florida, they can now use remote online notaries. You can have somebody buy a home from the comfort of their own couch. Title companies know the processes. They have to be certified to do this. And they are moving forward best they can. But like we talked about, lenders are really the big holdup. Lenders are requiring these wet signatures, and that is slowing down the ability to move to virtual as much as everyone would really like to. They aren't trendsetters. They are slow to change their policies. And one of the big concerns is that even if they allow a digital signature, if they want to package up their loans and sell them, the bank or the mortgage broker that they're selling it to may not allow digital signatures. And so that particular loan cannot be packaged up, and that's a big concern for future dealings. Remote online notary is the new way to go if the lender will allow it. There's certain processes that must be required to happen before you can do it. So it is, the title agents are required to take a course on the process. They have to have extra insurance, extra bonding to cover the additional requirements. Many, some are moving forward. Good internet is key. If the process gets cut off, you have to start over, which can be a big problem. But again, creating expectations upfront on what the process is, that's very important. And if you have a cash closing, this is something you can definitely move forward with. So just kind of some thoughts on the future. New protocols for safety. It will be a long time before everyone is comfortable with the social interaction inherent in home buying. I think we all know that. And until then, the safety protocols and the virtual tools will be the industry standard. Tech is on hyperdrive. This creativity and imaginativeness that everyone is having to do, well, all the tech companies are doing that as well. They're working to survive the crisis, to bring in buyers, to keep sales moving, and it's pushing this tech revolution like we've never seen before. And I don't see us going back from that. It's here to stay. Virtual is convenient. The technology is getting better. And the newest generation of homeowners, home buyers, expects it. So we ultimately go where our customers go, and they are going virtual. And I think everything will follow from that. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I hope this has given you a little bit of feedback on what's going on in the industry, what people are seeing, and answer some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ann.
Do you have any questions?
No.
All right.
Really great presentation. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I have a question, Ann. With all the tech changes that are happening, has the Board of Realtors or anyone created any training for realtors to help them learn how to do effective video tours and that kind of stuff?
I have not seen a specific training program by the Florida Realtors. And
Okay.
I think part of that is because there's so many different technologies and there's so many different ways to do it. I think a lot of ways that realtors are doing it to start is they're just walking around the house with their phone, like that at its most basic, while the realtor's on the other end watching it from their home. That's the most basic kind of virtual tour. And then stepping it up with the different kinds of technology that can be minimal to very advanced, depends on that technology that you're using.
Thanks.
All right, well, thanks everyone. I hope you got everything you needed out of this, and we look forward to if we can help you in the future. Take care.